$500,000 was the funeral money for my 3-year marriage. Victoria Sterling paid me to disappear. Clearing the path for her new pregnant daughter-in-law, I left broken. But 3 weeks later, a pregnancy test changed everything. I had sold my title as a wife, but I would never sell my child. When the Sterlings discover the true heir grows inside the woman they exiled, the real war begins. My name is Celeste Harrington, and for the last 3 years, I have lived in a museum where nothing was allowed to be touched, including my own husband. The library of the Sterling estate in Boston was a cavern of mahogany and leather, smelling of lemon polish and the kind of silence that costs millions of dollars to maintain. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the manicured hedges with white. But inside, the air was stiflingly hot. I sat in a high-backed chair that was designed to make the sitter feel small. Directly across from me sat Victoria Sterling, my mother-in-law, a woman who wore pearls like armor and whose hair had never dared to move out of place in all the time I had known her. To her right sat Julian, my husband, the man who had vowed to love and cherish me until death did us part. Currently, he was studying the pattern of the Persian rug with the intensity of a man trying to calculate the distance to the nearest exit. "Celeste," Victoria began. Her voice was not loud. Victoria never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She spoke with the calm, absolute authority of a woman who owned half the shipping lanes on the Atlantic. "We are not going to waste time with pleasantries today. The situation has become untenable." I folded my hands in my lap. My knuckles were white, but my face remained impassive. I had learned that much in 3 years. "I assume you are referring to the rumors, Victoria?" "They are not rumors," she said, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. It stopped perfectly at the edge, right in front of me. "They are facts. Julian has been seeing Vanessa Croft." I did not open the envelope. I did not need to see the grainy photos of Julian entering a hotel, or holding hands with the daughter of Senator Croft at a charity gala I had been told not to attend. The name Vanessa Croft hung in the air like the scent of overly sweet perfume. She was everything I was not. She was old money. She was political royalty. She was the woman Victoria had wanted Julian to marry 3 years ago, before he had briefly rebelled and chosen the art student from a middle-class family. "I know," I said softly. I looked at Julian. "I have known for months." Julian flinched, but he still refused to look at me. He was 32 years old. Yet at that moment, he looked like a naughty schoolboy waiting for his mother to clean up his mess. "Then you understand why this marriage is over," Victoria continued, her tone brisk, as if she were firing a maid who had stolen silverware. "But there is a development you may not be aware of. Vanessa is pregnant." The air left my lungs. It wasn't a sharp pain. Not yet. It was a dull, heavy blow, like being hit underwater. I stared at Victoria. "Pregnant. She is carrying a son," Victoria said, emphasizing the word son as if it were a holy title. "A sterling heir, something you, quite frankly, have failed to provide." "I am 28, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "We have only been trying for a year. These things take time." "We do not have time," Victoria interrupted. "And let us be honest. Celeste, you are too high-strung, too emotional. Doctor Arrington said stress is a major factor in infertility. You simply are not built for the pressure of this family. Vanessa, however, is breeding stock. She is healthy, she is vibrant, and she is carrying the future of this company." I looked at Julian again, willing him to speak, willing him to defend me. I had never even been sent to a fertility specialist. The difficulty was an assumption Victoria had made because I hadn't produced a baby on her schedule. "Julian," I said, "is this what you want? You are discarding me because I haven't given you a son in 12 months. Julian finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, watery and weak. "I'm sorry. Celeste," he mumbled. It's a boy. The line has to continue. You know how important the legacy is to Mother. To Mother? Not to him. To Mother. The love I had held for him, a love that had already been fraying at the edges for months, suddenly evaporated. It didn't turn into hate. It just turned into ash. He was not a villain. He was something worse. He was a coward. So, I said, turning back to the woman who was actually in charge of my marriage. What now? Victoria opened a leather folder. We have prepared a separation agreement. It is extremely generous, considering you brought no assets into this union. She pushed a check toward me. I looked at the numbers. $500,000. $500,000. It was a fortune to the girl I used to be. It was enough to buy a house, start a business, and travel the world. But in this room, it felt like pocket change. It felt like a tip left on a nightstand. There are conditions, Victoria said, tapping a stack of documents with a manicured fingernail. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Upon signing, you will receive the funds. In exchange, you will leave Boston within 48 hours. You will change your phone number. You will not speak to the press. You will not contact Julian. You will not use the Sterling name. Effectively, Celeste, you will cease to exist in our world. You are paying me to disappear, I stated flatly. I am paying for a clean slate, Victoria corrected. Vanessa is a senator's daughter. We cannot have a scandal. We cannot have an ex-wife lingering around like a bad smell while Julian prepares for a wedding that will merge two of the most powerful families on the East Coast. You are a loose end, my dear, and I like my ends tied. I looked at the check again. Then I looked at the NDA. It was a thick document, likely drafted by a team of lawyers who cost more per hour than my father made in a month. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to pretend the last 3 years never happened. A part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the papers up and throw them in Victoria's face. I wanted to drag this out in court, to expose Julian's infidelity, to make them bleed. But then I looked at Julian again. He was picking at a loose thread on his trousers. He looked miserable, and I realized that fighting for him would be the most pathetic thing I could do. Why would I fight to keep a man who couldn't even look me in the eye while his mother bought me off? Why would I want to stay in this cold, loveless mausoleum of a house for one more second? My dignity was worth more than a fight. My freedom was worth more than revenge, at least. That is what I told myself to keep from crying. Where do I sign? I asked. Victoria blinked. She had expected resistance. She had expected tears, begging, perhaps a negotiation for more money. She did not expect the icy calm that had suddenly settled over me. Right here, she said, pointing to the bottom of the page. And here, an initial here. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen lying on the desk. The ink was black. I signed my name, Celeste Harrington. I didn't use Sterling. I was already done with that name. I signed page after page, the scratching of the nib the only sound in the room. When I was finished, I capped the pen and placed it down gently. I reached for the check. My hand did not shake. Excellent, Victoria said, pulling the papers back toward her. The transfer will clear in 24 hours. You have until noon on Friday to vacate the premises. The staff will pack your things. I don't want the things, I said. Standing up, my legs felt steady. I came here with 2 suitcases of clothes and my art supplies. That is all I will leave with. You can burn the designer dresses you bought me. They never fit right anyway. Victoria narrowed her eyes. As you wish. Just make sure you're gone. I looked at Julian one last time. Goodbye, Julian. I hope she makes you happy. Or at least, I hope she makes your mother happy, since that seems to be the only thing that matters. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just looked down again. I turned to leave, but stopped. I looked down at my left hand. The 3-carat diamond ring on my finger caught the light from the chandelier. It was a flawless stone, cold and sharp. It had belonged to Julian's grandmother. It was worth more than the house my parents lived in. For 3 years, I had worn it every day. I had been terrified of losing it. I had polished it. I had let it weigh my hand down. I gripped the ring and pulled. It was tight, but with a sharp tug, it slid over my knuckle. I dropped it onto the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy, solid thud that echoed in the quiet room. It spun for a moment before settling near the checkbook. "You forgot this," I said. "You can keep it," Julian whispered, speaking for the first time since the apology. "As part of the settlement." "No," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It is too heavy. I cannot wear it any more." I walked out of the study without looking back. The hallway was vast and drafty. The portraits of dead Sterlings stared down at me from the walls, their eyes judging, their mouths set in permanent lines of disapproval. I walked past them, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't go upstairs to pack. I didn't need to. I had packed a bag that morning, hidden in the trunk of my old sedan, the one car they hadn't forced me to sell because they deemed it too embarrassing to be seen in the garage. I had known. Deep down, I had known this was coming. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a slap. The wind was howling now, driving the snow into my face. It was freezing, but it felt good. It felt real. The air inside the house had been recycled and stale. This air was sharp and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the chill. I walked down the long, winding driveway toward the gate where my car was parked on the side of the road. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. I had $500,000 in my pocket, no husband, and no home. I should have felt terrified. But as I reached the end of the driveway, headlights swept across the snow. A sleek black limousine was turning into the estate. The windows were tinted, but as it slowed to wait for the iron gates to open, the rear window rolled down just an inch. I stopped, inside, bathed in the soft glow of the car's interior light. Sat Vanessa Croft. She was wearing a fur coat that probably cost more than my college tuition. She looked radiant, her skin glowing, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She saw me. She saw me standing there in the snow, clutching my coat, looking like exactly what I was, the discarded wife, and she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't even a pitying smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just secured its territory. She placed a hand protectively over her stomach, a gesture meant specifically for me to see. I won. That smile said, "I have a son. I have the ring. I have a life." The window rolled up. The gates opened with a groan of metal, and the limousine glided through, carrying the new Mrs. Sterling toward the warmth of the mansion I had just been exiled from. I stood in the darkness for a moment longer, watching the red taillights disappear up the drive. The snow was falling harder now, covering my tracks, erasing the evidence that I had ever been there. I turned and walked to my car. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for certain. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize I was a seed. I started the engine, and for the first time in 3 years, I drove away from the Sterling estate without telling anyone when I would be back, because I wasn't coming back. Not as the woman they knew. I drove into the whiteout of the storm, leaving Boston behind, leaving Celeste Sterling behind. The road ahead was dark and dangerous, but it was mine, and as the city lights faded in my rearview mirror, I let the first tear fall. Just one, the last one I would shed for Julian Sterling. Seattle did not just rain, it wept. It was a constant, gray drizzle that seemed to seep into the very marrow of my bones, washing away the sharp edges of the woman I used to be. I had chosen this city for its distance, 3,000 miles from Boston, 3,000 miles from the heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate, 3,000 miles from the ghost of the marriage that had consumed my 20s. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. In a neighborhood where the houses were painted in peeling pastels and the lawns were overgrown with blackberries, it was the antithesis of the manicured perfection I had lived in for 3 years. My new home had a leaky faucet in the kitchen and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. But it was mine. I paid the rent in cash, withdrawing small amounts from the account where the $500,000 sat, untouched and stagnant. I hated that money. I hated what it represented. Every time I looked at the balance, I felt like I was looking at the price tag for my own soul. To the world. Celeste Harrington had vanished. In her place stood Rose. It was my middle name, a name my mother used to call me when I was a child. Before she passed away, before I became an art student, before I became a trophy wife, Rose was simple. Rose wore oversized sweaters and jeans. Rose did not wear diamonds. I found a job at a small flower shop called The Petal and Stem. The owner, Martha, was a woman in her 60s with hands rough from soil and a laugh that sounded like dry leaves rustling together. She didn't ask questions about why a woman with hands as soft as mine was applying for a job hauling buckets of water and trimming thorns. She just looked at my eyes, saw the hollowness there, and handed me an apron. "Don't let the lilies stain your shirt," was all she said. My days fell into a numb rhythm. I woke up, I walked to the shop, I arranged flowers, I walked home. I stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged me under, but the nights were the hardest. In the silence of that damp apartment, the memories would creep in. I would dream of the library in Boston. I would dream of Julian's back turned to me as he slept on the far edge of the bed. I would dream of Victoria's cold, manicured hand sliding that check across the desk. I would wake up gasping, my chest tight, drenched in a cold sweat. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was the natural reaction to having your life surgically removed without anesthesia. But as the weeks turned into a month, the physical toll became impossible to ignore. It started with the coffee. There was a small bakery next to the flower shop that roasted its own beans. For the first 2 weeks, the smell of dark roast coffee had been the only thing waking me up in the morning. Then, one Tuesday, I walked past the open door of the bakery, and the scent hit me like a physical blow. My stomach turned violent. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth and run to the alleyway behind the shop, dry heaving until my throat burned. "You all right, Rose?" Martha asked, when I came in through the back door, my face pale. "Just a stomach bug," I lied, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. Or maybe something I ate, but it wasn't just the nausea, it was the exhaustion. It was a bone-deep weariness that coffee couldn't touch. I found myself sitting on the stool behind the counter, my head swimming, struggling to keep my eyes open even though I had slept for 10 hours the night before. My emotions, too, were erratic. I cried over a broken stem on a peony. I felt a sudden, irrational rage when a customer was rude to Martha. I blamed it on the depression. I blamed it on the stress of starting over. I told myself my body was just manifesting my broken heart. I was a woman who had been discarded because she was barren, because she was too high-strung, as Victoria had put it. The irony of my body failing me now, in my new life, felt like a cruel joke. Then came the day of the fainting spell. It was a Friday, and the shop was busy. We had a large order for wedding white roses, baby's breath, cascading ivy. The scent in the shop was overwhelming, a thick perfume of cut greens and damp earth. I was standing on a step stool, reaching for a vase on the top shelf, when the world suddenly tilted on its axis. The edges of my vision went fuzzy, like static on an old television screen. The sound of Martha talking to a customer sounded like she was speaking from underwater. I tried to grab the shelf, but my hands felt like they belonged to someone else. "Rose." I heard Martha's voice, sharp with alarm. That was the last thing I heard before the floor rushed up to meet me. When I opened my eyes, the light was too bright. It stung. I blinked, trying to make sense of the sterile white ceiling tiles above me. I wasn't in the flower shop. I was lying on a narrow bed, covered by a thin, scratchy blanket. The smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol replaced the scent of roses. "She's awake," a voice said. I turned my head. Martha was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, clutching her purse. She looked terrified. "Martha," I croaked. My throat was dry. "Oh, thank heavens," Martha said, rushing to the side of the bed. "You gave me a heart attack. Girl, you dropped like a stone. I called the ambulance. We're at the emergency room." The emergency room. Panic flared in my chest. I couldn't be here. I couldn't have a paper trail. I couldn't use my insurance. I didn't have insurance anymore. The policy had been canceled the moment the divorce was finalized. I have to go, I said, trying to sit up. The room spun, and I fell back against the pillow. You are not going anywhere, a deep voice commanded. A doctor walked into the cubicle. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a clipboard in his hand. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Ms. Harrington, he said. I froze. I hadn't used that name in Seattle. I had given the hospital my ID. Of course. I'm Dr. Evans, he continued. Your friend here said you have been complaining of nausea and fatigue for a few weeks. Is that correct? I nodded slowly. I thought it was stress. I've been through a lot recently. Doctor, Evans sighed and looked at the chart. Well, stress can certainly exacerbate things, but it is not the root cause of your condition. We ran some blood work while you were unconscious. He paused, looking at me with a strange expression. It wasn't a pity. It was a mixture of professional curiosity and something softer. Your blood pressure is a bit low, and you are dehydrated, he said. But the primary reason for your symptoms is quite clear. You are pregnant, Ms. Harrington. The silence that followed was louder than any noise I had ever heard. The beep of the monitor, the murmur of voices in the hallway, the hum of the ventilation, everything vanished. What? I whispered. You are pregnant, he repeated, his voice gentle. Based on the hormone levels, I would estimate you are about 7 weeks along. 7 weeks. My mind raced, doing the math that I had refused to do for the last month. 7 weeks ago. That was before the divorce papers were signed. That was before the confrontation in the library. That was before I left. 7 weeks ago was the night of the Founders' Gala. Julian had come home late, smelling of whiskey and frustration. He had been surprisingly tender that night, a rare moment of connection in a sea of distance. I had thought, foolishly, that maybe we were turning a corner. I didn't know then that he had already been seeing Vanessa. I didn't know that was his guilt speaking, not his love. That's impossible, I said, my voice shaking. I was told I couldn't. We tried for a year. My mother-in-law said, Well, Doctor, Evans said with a small smile, I don't know what your mother-in-law said, but the test doesn't lie. You are definitely pregnant, and barring the dehydration, the fetus appears to be healthy. Martha gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh, Rose, a baby. But I couldn't smile. I couldn't breathe. A baby. I wasn't barren. I wasn't broken. The accusations Victoria had hurled at me that I was defective, that I couldn't provide an heir were lies. Or maybe it was just cruel timing. And then, the cold reality of my situation crashed down on me, shattering the momentary wonder, the contract. I closed my eyes, the text of the non-disclosure agreement scrolling behind my eyelids like a ticker tape. The undersigned agrees to sever all ties with the Sterling family. The undersigned agrees to make no future claims against the estate. The undersigned agrees that the settlement of $500,000 is final and absolute. Ties. What was a child if not a tie? This baby was Sterling. This baby was the first grandchild. This baby was the heir Victoria had been so desperate for. The heir she had paid $500,000 to replace me for. If they knew. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced my heart. If Victoria Sterling knew I was carrying Julian's child, she wouldn't see a baby. She would see a breach of contract. She would see a piece of property that belonged to the Sterling estate. She would see a grandson being raised by a woman she deemed unfit. She had lawyers who could turn day into night. She had the money to crush me. She had already threatened to ruin me if I didn't disappear. Ms. Harrington, Doctor, Evans asked, concerned about creasing his brow. Are you all right? This seems to be a shock. I can't be pregnant, I whispered, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. You don't understand. I can't. Martha reached out and took my hand. Her skin was rough, but her grip was warm. It's okay, honey. It's a blessing. A baby is always a blessing. Not this one, I thought. This one is a target. I looked at the doctor. How accurate is dating 7 weeks? Give or take a few days, he said. We can do an ultrasound to be sure. No, I said quickly. Too quickly. No ultrasound. I don't have insurance. I can't afford it. We can work out a payment plan, he began. No, I repeated. Sitting up. The dizziness washed over me again, but I fought it down. I had to get out of here. I had to think. I just need to go home, please. I signed the discharge papers with a trembling hand. Martha drove me home in her battered station wagon. She didn't ask questions, but she kept glancing at me with worried eyes. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I pulled the curtains shut. I sat on the edge of my sagging mattress and stared at the wall. My hand drifted down to my stomach. It was still flat. There was no sign of life growing inside. The cluster of cells that had already developed a heartbeat, a son, a daughter. It didn't matter. It was mine. But it was also Julian's. And Julian is married to Vanessa now. Vanessa, who was supposedly carrying the heir. Wait, I sat up straight. Vanessa was pregnant. That was the reason for the divorce. That was the reason for the rush. Victoria had said she was carrying a son. If I came forward, if I told them, I laughed, a dry, hysterical sound that bounced off the empty walls. If I told them, Victoria would destroy me. She would take the baby. She would claim I was unfit, unstable, poor. She would use the contract to sue me into oblivion and then take custody. She would raise my child in that cold museum of a house, teaching him to value money over kindness, lineage over love. My child would grow up calling Vanessa mother. No. The word rose up inside me, primal and fierce. No. I looked at the small pile of cash on my dresser, my tips from the flower shop. I looked at the bank statement with the settlement money. $500,000, I whispered to the empty room. You paid me to disappear. You paid me to sever all ties. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at my reflection. I looked pale, tired, dark circles under my eyes. But beneath the fear, I saw something else igniting in my gaze. It was the same look a wolf gives when it is backed into a corner. They wanted me gone. Fine. I would stay gone. They wanted no ties. Fine. I would ensure this tie remained invisible. I placed both hands over my lower abdomen, pressing firmly against the fabric of my jeans. You are not Sterling, I vowed to the tiny life inside me. You are not an heir. You are not a bargaining chip. You are mine, just mine. I would hide this. I would hide him or her from the world. I would become so small, so insignificant, that the eye of Sauron that was the Sterling Empire would never look my way again. I would have this baby in secret. I would raise this baby in this rainy city where no one knew my name. But as I made that vow, a chill ran down my spine. I remembered the clause in the contract about material breach. I remembered Victoria's parting words about tying up loose ends. I was no longer just a loose end. I was a ticking time bomb. And I had about 7 months before the explosion. I lay back down on the bed, curling into a ball around my stomach. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the window pane. I was alone. I was terrified. And I was pregnant with the child of a man who had just married someone else, but for the first time since I left Boston. I wasn't just a victim, I was a guardian, and God help anyone who tried to take this baby from me. 6 months is a lifetime when you are growing a new life inside you. The rain in Seattle had not stopped, but I had stopped fighting it. Instead, I learned to let it wash over me, cleaning away the residue of the life I had left behind in Boston. My belly, once flat and easily hidden beneath oversized sweaters, was now a firm, prominent curve that announced itself to the world before I did. I was 6 months pregnant, and for the first time in years, I did not feel empty. I felt full. I stood in the center of an old converted warehouse in the Fremont district. The floors were concrete, stained with decades of industrial use, and the brick walls were exposed and crumbling in the most charming way possible. The air smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and the damp earthiness of the city. It smelled like freedom. I had made a decision about the money. For the first few weeks, the $500,000 had sat in my account like a radioactive isotope, something I was afraid to touch lest it poison me. But as my waistline expanded, my perspective shifted. Victoria Sterling had given me that money to erase me. I decided to use it to draw myself back in. But in brighter, bolder colors, I invested $100,000 into this space. I named it Novara. It meant nothing in particular, but it sounded like Nova, like a star exploding and creating something new from the dust. "You should put that chair over by the window." "Rose," a voice called out from the doorway. "The light hits the velvet better." I turned to see Martha, holding a Tupperware container that definitely contained lasagna. Over the last half-year, Martha had transitioned from my employer at the flower shop to something far more vital. She was my anchor. She was the grandmother my child would never have on his father's side. "You think?" I asked, looking at the vintage emerald armchair I had restored myself. "I know," Martha said, setting the food on my drafting table. "And you need to eat. That boy is kicking up a storm today. I can see it moving your shirt." I smiled and placed a hand on my stomach. It was a boy. I found out 2 weeks ago. A son. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. I was carrying the firstborn Sterling grandson, the very thing Victoria had practically sold her soul to acquire, and she would never know he existed. I sat down and opened the lasagna. "Thank you, Martha. I don't know what I would do without you." "You'd starve. And you'd have terrible taste in curtains," she teased, sitting on a stool opposite me. "By the way, did you see the paper today?" The air in the room shifted instantly. Martha knew about my past, or at least the broad strokes of it. She knew I had run from a powerful family. She knew the father was out of the picture. She didn't know the names, but she knew the pain. "No," I said, my appetite dimming slightly. "Should I?" "Probably not," she admitted, but she didn't move to hide the newspaper sticking out of her tote bag. I reached for it. My hand hesitated, but curiosity is a cruel master. I pulled the paper out. It was right there on the front page of the lifestyle section. Syndicated from the East Coast. The wedding of the century. The photo was high resolution and glossy. Julian stood at the altar of a cathedral that looked big enough to house a small army. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my entire studio renovation. Beside him stood Vanessa. She was breathtaking in a gown of lace and silk, her hand resting protectively over a baby bump that seemed perfectly round, perhaps a bit too round for how far along she was supposed to be. But the camera loved her. The headline screamed, "Power Couple Unites, Julian Sterling Weds Senator's Daughter," amidst rumors of twins. Twins. I stared at the word. The media was in a frenzy. The Sterling dynasty was securing its future with not one, but 2 heirs. A buy one, get one free deal for the family legacy. I looked closer at Julian's face. The caption described him as the beaming groom, but I knew that face. I had woken up next to that face for 3 years. I knew the difference between a smile that reached the eyes and a grimace that was purely muscular. His eyes were dead. They were flat, matte, and utterly vacant. He looked like a man who was standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. I expected to feel jealousy. I expected to feel that hot, acidic burn of betrayal. But as I sat there in my dusty studio, with paint under my fingernails and a kicking baby in my womb, I felt only a profound, quiet pity. He was trapped in the museum now. He was the exhibit, and I was the one looking in from the outside, holding the ticket to my own life. "He looks unhappy," I said softly. Martha peered at the photo. "He looks like he's wearing shoes 2 sizes too small," I laughed, and the tension broke. "He probably is. Victoria likely picked them out." I closed the paper and pushed it aside. "It doesn't matter. Good for them. I hope they have happy, healthy twins. I really do." And I meant it, because if Vanessa gave them what they wanted, they would never come looking for me. My phone rang. pulling me back to the present. It was a supplier confirming the delivery of fabric for a new client. Novara was growing. It started with one small consultation for a local cafe, and word had spread. My style was different. It was raw, emotional, mixing industrial hardness with soft, organic comfort. It was the physical manifestation of my own survival. People in Seattle liked it. They called it authentic. If only they knew the entire foundation of my life was a lie. The next day, I had my monthly checkup. I went alone. I always went alone. Doctor. Evans greeted me with the warmth of an old friend. He had respected my lack of insurance and my cash payments without judgment. "All right, Rose," he said, applying the cold gel to my stomach. "Let's see how the little linebacker is doing." The screen flickered to life, and then the sound filled the small room. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was the most aggressive, beautiful rhythm in the world. It sounded like a galloping horse. It sounded like a drum solo. "Strong heartbeat, Doctor," Evans noted. "Everything looks perfect. He is measuring a few days ahead. Actually, he is going to be a big one." I watched the grainy black and white image of my son sucking his thumb. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and fast. For years, I had been told my body was broken. I had been told my womb was a hostile environment. I had internalized that failure until I believed I was less than a woman. But look at him. He was perfect. He was thriving. It wasn't me that was toxic. It was the environment I had been living in. "He's beautiful," I whispered. "He is." "Doctor," Evans agreed. "You're doing a great job. Mom." Mom. The words settled into my chest, heavier and more precious than the 3-carat diamond I had left on that mahogany table. I left the clinic feeling invincible. I drove back to Novara with the windows down, letting the damp air whip my hair around my face. When I arrived, there was a man standing in front of the glass storefront, peering in at my display of sketches. He was tall, wearing a charcoal coat that was well cut but worn at the elbows. He had messy dark hair, and he was holding a helmet under one arm. A motorcycle was parked at the curb. I parked and walked up. "Can I help you?" He turned. He had intelligent eyes, the color of slate, and a smile that was crooked and disarming. "I hope so," he said. "I've been standing here for 10 minutes trying to figure out if this is an interior design studio or an art gallery." "It's a bit of both," I said, unlocking the door. "I'm Rose." "Liam," he said, extending a hand. "Liam Vance. I'm an architect. I'm working on the renovation of the old firehouse down on 4th Street. My client wants something edgy but livable, which usually translates to, I have no idea what I want, but I hate everything I see." I laughed. "I know the type." "I walked past your window yesterday," Liam continued, following me inside. "I saw that sketch of the living room with the suspended steel fireplace. It's brilliant. It's exactly the vibe I've been trying to explain to them." He walked over to my drafting table, where my latest watercolors were drying. He didn't look at my pregnant belly. He didn't look at my ringless finger. He looked at my work. "You have a hell of an eye, Rose," he said, studying the lines. "You understand structure, but you don't let it strangle the room. Where did you study?" I froze for a split second. I had studied at the Rhode Island School of Design, a fact that would easily trace back to Celeste Harrington. "Self-taught," I lied smoothly. "I just pick things up." Liam looked at me, and I saw a flicker of doubt, but he didn't press. "Well, you picked up more than most people learn in a master's program. Look, I need a partner on this firehouse project. The interior is a beast. I handle the bones. You handle the soul. Interested?" I looked at him. This was it. This was the validation I had been starved of for 3 years. Julian had never looked at my art. Victoria had called it messy hobbies. Yet here was a stranger offering me a partnership based solely on my merit. "I'm expensive," I warned him, channeling a confidence I didn't quite feel. Liam grinned. "Good. Cheap design is expensive in the long run." We shook on it. And just like that, Novara had its first major contract. The next 2 months were a blur of activity. Working with Liam was easy. He was demanding, yes, and he drank too much espresso, but he treated me as an equal. He dragged stools over for me to sit on when we were on site. He made sure the contractors didn't smoke near me. But he never coddled my mind. He challenged my ideas, forced me to defend my choices, and in doing so, he made me a better designer. I was 8 months pregnant when the firehouse project was completed. It was stunning. We had kept the brass poles and the brick, but softened it with plush velvet, warm walnut wood, and lighting that made everyone look beautiful. The client was ecstatic. He threw a launch party. I attended, wearing a flowing black dress that draped over my massive belly, staying in the shadows while Liam handled the toasts. A woman with sharp glasses and a sharper bob cornered me near the buffet. "You're the designer," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "Rose." "Alara Vance," she said, "editor of Pacific Modern. No relation to Liam, sadly, though I keep asking him to marry me." I smiled. "He's a catch." "He says you're the genius behind this warmth," Alara said, gesturing to the room. "I want to feature this project in next month's issue. The firehouse conversion is hot right now, but I want the story to be about you, the mysterious pregnant designer who appeared out of nowhere and redefined industrial chic." My blood ran cold. A magazine feature. Pacific Modern was regional, but it had a digital edition. It was read all over the West Coast, maybe even the East Coast. I'm flattered," I stammered. "But I'm very private. Privacy is for people who aren't talented," Alara scoffed. "Look, 5 pages, full spread. It will put Novara on the map. You'll have a waiting list a mile long before the baby even cuts his first tooth." I looked around the room. I looked at the life I was building. I needed this. The money from the settlement wouldn't last forever, not with a child to raise. I needed a career. I needed stability. But one single photo of my face, and Victoria's algorithms would find me. "I'll do it," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Alara clapped her hands. "Marvelous! I'll send the photographer on Tuesday." "Wait," I said, raising a hand. "There is a condition. A non-negotiable condition." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what is that?" "You only drink Evian water." "No photos of my face," I said firmly. "You can photograph my hands working. You can photograph me from behind, or in silhouette. You can photograph the room, but my face does not appear in print or online. If you publish my face, I sue." Alara stared at me. She was a journalist. She smelled a story. "Why are you in witness protection?" She was joking, but the joke landed too close to the bone. "I'm a designer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I want my work to speak, not my image, especially right now." I gestured to my stomach. "I don't want to be the pregnant designer. I just want to be a designer." It was a flimsy excuse, but Alara seemed to buy it. Or maybe she just wanted the firehouse story bad enough not to care. "Fine," she agreed. "Artistic mystery. I can work with that. It might even make you more intrigued. The phantom designer of Seattle." We shook hands. I drove home that night feeling a mixture of triumph and nausea. I had done it. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes. I had a business, a friend, a colleague, and a son on the way. I was Rose, the successful designer. But as I lay in bed that night, feeling the baby turn somersaults, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just opened a door I had locked very tight. I had stepped into the light, and in the shadows of Boston. The wolves were always watching. I just had to hope that the distance and the silhouette would be enough to keep them at bay. Because if they really saw me, they wouldn't just see Rose. They would see the missing piece of their empire, and they would come for it. While I was busy building a sanctuary in Seattle, the fortress I had left behind in Boston was beginning to crumble from the inside out. I did not know the details, then I was too busy counting kicks and choosing paint swatches. But truth has a way of rising to the surface. like oil in water. I would later learn that the happily ever after Victoria Sterling had purchased for her son was more of a horror story disguised as a fairy tale. In the 3-story master suite that I used to scrub until my hands ached, Julian was living in a special kind of hell. Vanessa Croft had not entered the Sterling family to be a wife. She had entered to be a queen. She replaced my quiet mornings with chaotic demands. She fired the cook who had been with the family for 20 years because the woman didn't know how to make a specific type of gluten-free, dairy-free, joy-free pancake. She redecorated the library, the one room Julian actually loved, turning it into a beige monstrosity that looked more like a hotel lobby than a home, but the real rot lay deeper. The press was still hailing them as the power couple, printing glossy photos of Vanessa cradling her bump at charity galas. But inside the mansion, behind the heavy velvet curtains, the reality was grotesque. Vanessa had lost the twins. It had happened naturally. A tragic miscarriage at 8 weeks, just a month after I left. A normal woman would have grieved. A normal family would have mourned. But Vanessa Croft was not normal, and she certainly wasn't going to let biology get in the way of her ambition. She knew her hold on the Sterling fortune, and more importantly, on Victoria's respect was entirely dependent on her uterus. So, she didn't say a word. She bought a high-end silicone prosthetic bump online. She padded her bras. She faked morning sickness with the performance skills of an Academy Award winner. She was playing a dangerous game. She planned to arrange a secret surrogacy or a private adoption abroad and pass the baby off as her own. A scheme so audacious it made my simple lie about being Rose seem like child's play. Julian knew something was wrong. He didn't know the full extent of the deception yet. Vanessa banned him from the bedroom. Claiming her high-risk pregnancy required absolute solitude, but he felt the coldness. He began to stay late at the office, not to work, but to sit in his leather chair and drink scotch until the edges of his world blurred. He told me later that in those whiskey-soaked hours, he didn't think of Vanessa's political connections or his mother's approval. He thought of me. He thought of the beef stew I used to make on rainy Tuesdays. He thought of the way I used to rub his shoulders without him asking. He realized, with the slow, dull pain of a blunt knife, that he had traded a home for a house. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to taste the bitterness of her own medicine. She had wanted a daughter-in-law with a backbone, someone from her own world. Well, she got one. Vanessa treated Victoria not with the deference I had shown, but with the arrogance of a peer. They fought over dinner menus, over guest lists, over the color of the nursery, for the first time in her life. The Iron Lady of Boston was rusting. She looked at Vanessa's sharp edges and found herself missing my soft curves. But 3,000 miles away, my curves were very real, and they were contracting. It happened on a Tuesday night in November. The Seattle rain was hammering against the roof of my apartment like 1,000 tiny fists. I was sketching a layout for a new client when the first pain wrapped around my lower back and squeezed. I didn't panic. I had spent the last 8 months preparing for this. I called Martha. "It's time," was all I said. Martha was at my door in 15 minutes, her hair in curlers, her car engine idling. We drove to the hospital in silence, the windshield wipers slapping out a rhythm that matched my racing heart. The labor was long. It was brutal. There were no epidurals in my plan because I wanted to feel everything. I wanted to know that this pain was mine, that this effort was mine, for hours. I labored in that dimly lit room, gripping Martha's hand until I thought I might break her fingers. I thought of Victoria telling me I was weak. I thought of Julian turning away from me, and with every contraction, I pushed them further into the past. And then, at 4 a.m, the world shifted. A cry pierced the air. It was a sound of pure indignation, loud and strong. "It's a boy, Doctor," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Rose, look at him." They placed him on my chest. He was warm, wet, and heavy. I looked down into a face that was terrifyingly familiar. He had Julian's dark hair, a thick thatch of it, even as a newborn. He had the Sterling nose. But when he opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh hospital lights, I saw my mother's eyes staring back at me. "Leo," I whispered. "My little Leo." I named him Leo because he would need to be a lion. He would need to be fierce. The love that flooded me was not the gentle, poetic love I had read about in books. It was a violent, protective force. It was a tidal wave, looking at his tiny fingers curling around my thumb. I knew I would burn the world down to keep him safe. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days, paying in cash, using my alias. When I brought him home to the small apartment, the space suddenly felt like a palace. It was filled with the scent of milk and baby powder. Martha came over every day, fussing over him, calling him Little Prince. For 3 weeks, we lived in a bubble of bliss. I didn't think about the NDA. I didn't think about the $500,000. I was just a mother. But bubbles are fragile things, and the modern world is full of sharp needles. It was a rare sunny day in Seattle. The clouds had parted, revealing the mountain in the distance. White and majestic against the blue sky, I had been cooped up in the apartment for days, and Leo was fussy. "Let's go for a walk," I told him as I strapped him into the stroller I had bought secondhand. "Just a quick one to the park." I wore a beanie pulled low over my ears and a large scarf, my standard uniform of anonymity. We walked to Cary Park, the famous viewpoint that overlooked the city skyline and the Space Needle. The air was crisp and clean. I took Leo out of the stroller and sat on a bench, holding him close, pointing out the ferries crossing the Sound, even though he couldn't see past his own nose. I let my guard down. For just a moment, I forgot to scan the perimeter. I forgot to turn my face away from the crowds. I was just a woman enjoying the sun with her son. I didn't see the girl standing 10 feet away. She was young, stylish, holding a phone attached to a ring light. She was a travel blogger, one of those influencers who document every cappuccino and sunset for an audience of strangers. She was filming a reel about the hidden gems of Seattle. She swept her camera across the view, catching the Space Needle, the water, the mountain, and me. In the background of her video, for exactly 3 seconds, was a clear shot of a woman with chestnut hair, laughing as she lifted a baby into the air. The scarf had slipped down. The sun hit my profile perfectly. She posted the video an hour later. She tagged it, "Seattle Life Travel with Test City Views." The internet is a terrifying web. It connects people who have no business being connected. The video went viral. Not because of me, but because the view was pretty. But algorithms are strange. The video appeared on the Explore page of a woman named Claire in Boston. Claire was a socialite, a bored housewife who spent her days scrolling through Instagram and her nights gossiping at country clubs. She had been a guest at my wedding. She had eaten my cake. She paused the video. She zoomed in. "Is that Celeste?" she whispered to her empty living room. She took a screenshot. She sent it to a group chat labeled, "Brunch Ladies." "Guys, am I crazy? Or is this Julian Sterling's ex-wife in Seattle? And is she holding a baby?" The rumors started as a whisper, then grew into a roar. Within 24 hours, the screenshot had circulated through the phones of every elite family in Beacon Hill. It was the juiciest scandal since the divorce itself. The barren wife has a baby. Whose is it? Did she cheat? Did she adopt? And inevitably, the screenshot landed on the iPad of Victoria Sterling. Victoria was sitting in her morning room, drinking tea, trying to ignore the sound of Vanessa screaming at a maid in the hallway. When the message came through, forwarded by a concerned friend, Victoria froze. She stared at the image. The resolution was good enough. It was Celeste. There was no mistaking that jawline, that hair. But Victoria's eyes didn't stay on me. They drifted to the bundle in my arms. She put down her teacup. Her hand was shaking. Not from age, but from a sudden, icy suspicion. She looked at the date of the post yesterday. She looked at the baby. He was small, clearly a newborn, maybe a month old. She did the mental math. Celeste had been gone for 7 months. If the baby was a month old, That meant he was born 7 months after the divorce, which meant conception happened, while she was still married to Julian. The cup rattled against the saucer. "Impossible," Victoria hissed. "She can't conceive. That was the whole point." But Victoria was a woman of logic, not faith. She knew that medical diagnoses could be wrong. She knew that miracles happened, and she knew, with a sinking dread, that if that child was Julian's, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't confront Julian. She didn't scream at Vanessa. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It was a private investigator, a man who specialized in cleaning up messes for the wealthy. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice turning into steel. "I have a job for you. It requires discretion and speed. I need you to go to Seattle." "Who am I looking for?" the voice on the other end asked. "My ex-daughter-in-law," Victoria said, her eyes fixed on the pixelated face of my son. "I need to know everything, where she lives, how she makes money, and most importantly, I need to know about the child." "What about the child?" "I need to know," Victoria whispered. "If he looks like my son." She hung up the phone. Outside, the Boston wind howled, rattling the window panes, but in Seattle, under the unsuspecting sun, I was tucking Leo into his crib, completely unaware that the countdown had begun. The silence was over. The hunt was on. The hunt began on a Tuesday, though I would not realize it until it was far too late. I had lulled myself into a false sense of security. I believed that the rain of Seattle was a curtain thick enough to hide me from the eyes of the East Coast. I believed that by changing my name to Rose and cutting my hair, I had become a different person, but I had forgotten the cardinal rule of the world I used to inhabit. Money does not just buy things. Money buys vision. It buys the ability to see through walls, through miles, and through lies. Mr. Finch, as I would later learn his name was, did not look like a movie villain. He looked like a grandfather who had lost his way. He wore a beige raincoat and drove a nondescript sedan that was always parked just far enough away from Novara to be ignored, but close enough to watch. He was a professional shadow. While I was busy selecting velvet swatches for the firehouse project and nursing Leo in the back room, Finch was dismantling my life. He followed me to the grocery store. He sat 2 tables away at the coffee shop, and most terrifying of all, he waited until garbage day. I was careful. I shredded my mail. I kept my documents in a safe, but a tired mother makes mistakes. One evening, after a particularly long bout of colic, I threw a bag of trash into the communal bin behind the studio. Inside that bag was a used diaper. That was all he needed, while I slept. Finch retrieved the bag. He extracted the genetic material. He overnighted it to a private lab in Massachusetts with a rush order that cost more than my monthly rent. 48 hours later, a report landed on Victoria Sterling's desk. The probability of paternity was 99.9%. I can only imagine the scene in that cold Boston library. Victoria must have looked at the numbers. And then she must have looked at the high-resolution photographs Finch had taken of Leo. In the photos, my son was laughing, his face scrunched up in a way that was undeniably, biologically Julian, the dark hair, the shape of the brow. He was a carbon copy of the boy Victoria had raised, staring back at her from 3,000 miles away. But that was not the only bomb that detonated in the Sterling household that week. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor and decided to strike twice, just as the DNA results confirmed the existence of a true heir in Seattle. The lie of the false heir in Boston collapsed. I learned later that it was a disgruntled nurse, fired by Vanessa's wealthy family, who leaked the medical records, or perhaps Vanessa simply slipped up. The details did not matter. What mattered was the truth that exploded across the tabloids and into the Sterling living room. Vanessa was not pregnant. She had miscarried months ago and had been wearing a prosthetic bump. Stalling for time. Negotiating with a surrogate in Ukraine to cover up her biological failure. Victoria Sterling had traded a fertile wife for a barren one. She had exiled the woman carrying her grandson to make room for a woman carrying a pillow. The rage of a woman like Victoria is not hot. It is cold. It is absolute zero. She did not scream. She simply mobilized. She summoned Julian, showed him the DNA report, and showed him the proof of Vanessa's deception. Then, she ordered the jet. I was oblivious. It was a Thursday afternoon at Novara. The studio was humming with activity. Liam was there, going over blueprints for a new loft conversion we had just landed. Leo was in his portable crib in the corner, sleeping soundly amidst the noise of the city. "We need to decide on the lighting fixtures for the entryway," Liam said, tapping his pen on the drafting table. "The client wants crystal, but I think it clashes with the industrial beams." "Brass," I said, not looking up from my sketch. "Aged brass. It bridges the gap between the old brick and the modern furniture. It's warm." "Brass it is," Liam agreed. "You have good instincts. Rose?" I smiled. "I will try." Then, the atmosphere in the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a sudden darkening, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. But when I looked out the large front window, it wasn't a cloud. 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the curb, blocking the entire front of the studio. They were massive, shining, and utterly out of place in our artsy, gritty neighborhood. They looked like government vehicles, or hearses. "What is that?" Liam asked, standing up and walking to the window. "Is the president visiting?" My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I knew those cars. I knew the tint on the windows. I knew the way the drivers stepped out in unison, wearing earpieces and dark suits. "No," I whispered. "It's worse." The door of the middle SUV opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a tailored charcoal coat and heels that clicked sharply against the pavement. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, not a strand out of place despite the damp wind. Victoria, and behind her, looking pale and ghostly in the gray light, came Julian. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over with a loud crash. "Rose!" Liam turned to me, with an alarm on his face. "Do you know them?" "Lock the door," I said, my voice trembling. "Liam, lock the door." But it was too late. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, welcoming sound that felt like a death knell. Victoria Sterling walked into my studio as if she owned the building, the street, and the air we were breathing. She stopped in the center of the room, her eyes sweeping over the exposed brick, the velvet furniture, the art on the walls. Then, her gaze landed on me. For a moment, there was silence. I was not the same woman she had dismissed 7 months ago. I was not wearing the pastel, modest dresses she had chosen for me. I was wearing wide-leg trousers and a fitted turtleneck stained with charcoal. My hair was loose and wild. I was working. I was alive. Julian stepped up beside her. He looked at me, and his jaw practically unhinged. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost that had suddenly burst into technicolor. "Celeste," he breathed. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, vibrating with a mixture of terror and fury. "Get out of my studio!" Liam stepped between us, crossing his arms. "I don't know who you people are, but the lady asked you to leave." Victoria didn't even look at Liam. She swatted the air with her hand, dismissing him as if he were a fly. "We are not here for pleasantries," Victoria said, her voice slicing through the room. "We are here for the boy." I stepped back, instinctively moving toward the crib in the corner. "I don't know what you are talking about." Victoria reached into her designer bag and pulled out a sheaf of papers. She slammed them down on my drafting table, right on top of my sketches. "Don't insult my intelligence. Celeste," she snapped. "We have the DNA report. 99% match Julian. We have the photos." She pointed a manicured finger at the crib. "That is my grandson. That is the Sterling heir." Julian moved past his mother, his eyes fixed on the crib. He looked like a man in a trance. Is it true? Celeste, is he mine?" "He is mine," I hissed, stepping in front of the crib, shielding Leo with my body. "He is nothing to you. You signed him away." "I signed away a wife," Julian said, his voice cracking. I didn't know. My God. Celeste, why didn't you tell me? Tell you. I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Tell you what? That while you were busy planning a wedding with your pregnant mistress, I was alone in a rental apartment throwing up from morning sickness. Tell you that I was terrified your mother would drag me into court. Vanessa is not pregnant, Victoria interrupted. Her face twisted with a sudden, ugly bitterness. The woman is a fraud, a liar. There is no baby. There never was. I stared at her. The shock of it hit me hard. Vanessa faked it. That sounds like a personal problem, I said coldly. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you. Victoria's composure cracked, her voice rising to a shout. You are holding the future of my family in that crib. You have been hiding him in this hovel. You stole him from us. I stole nothing, I screamed back. You threw me out. You paid me $500,000 to disappear. You made me sign a contract that said I was dead to you. The contract is void, Victoria yelled. It was based on fraud. You withheld material information. You knew you were pregnant. I didn't know. I lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. I hadn't known the moment I signed. I found out later, but it didn't matter. And even if I did, you made it very clear. No ties, no contact, total separation. Leo, sensing the tension, woke up. He let out a loud, wailing cry. The sound seemed to shatter Julian. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out. Let me see him. Please. Celeste, let me see my son. Don't come any closer, I warned. Liam moved again, positioning himself firmly between Julian and me. He was taller than Julian, broader, and he looked ready to fight. Back off, buddy. She said no. Victoria looked at Liam with pure disdain, then turned her laser focus back to me. She took a breath, smoothing her coat, trying to regain the upper hand. Listen to me. Celeste, she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, reasonable tone she used during negotiations. This is ridiculous. You are a single mother living in a warehouse. You cannot raise a sterling heir here. We can offer him everything. The best schools, the best doctors, a trust fund that will set him up for life. He has a mother who loves him, I said. That is enough. Love does not pay for Harvard, Victoria spat. We are taking him. We have lawyers drafting the custody papers as we speak. We will prove you are unfit. We will prove you absconded with the child. We will bury you in litigation until you are begging for mercy. She took a step toward me. Now, step aside and let me see my grandson. I looked at the woman who had terrified me for 3 years. I looked at the husband who had let me walk into the snow without a fight. And something inside me snapped. The fear evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that felt like iron. I stood tall. I looked Victoria Sterling straight in the eye. You seem to be confused, I said, my voice steady and quiet. You think you own people because you write checks, but you missed a detail. I reached into the diaper bag hanging on the crib and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of Leo's birth certificate. I held it up. Read it, I said. Victoria squinted at the paper. Name Leo Harrington, I read aloud. Mother Celeste Harrington. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Father unknown. Julian flinched as if I had slapped him. You bought my silence, Victoria, I said. You bought my exit. You paid $500,000 for me to become a ghost. Well, congratulations. You got what you paid for. The father of this child is a ghost. He doesn't exist on paper. He doesn't exist in the eyes of the law. We will do a paternity test, Victoria snarled. The court will order it. Let them, I challenged. And I will show the court the NDA you forced me to sign. I will show them the check. I will show them that you coerced a pregnant woman to leave the state under duress. I will tell the world that you valued your reputation over your own blood until you found out the other option was a fake. You want a war, I will give you a war. But I promise you, by the time I am done, there won't be a sterling reputation left to save. Victoria stared at me. For the first time in her life, She looked unsure. She looked at the fierce woman standing in front of her, and she realized she wasn't looking at the meek art student she had bullied. She was looking at a mother. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "Try me," I said. "Now get out of my studio before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Julian looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "Celeste, he's beautiful." "He is," I said, my voice softening just a fraction as I looked at my son, who was now whimpering softly. "And he is safe, from you." I pointed to the door. "Go," Victoria glared at me with a hatred that could peel paint. "This isn't over. Celeste, you have awoken a sleeping giant." "No, Victoria," I replied. "You just cornered a mother bear. You're the one who should be afraid." She turned on her heel and marched out. Julian lingered for a second longer, his eyes full of longing and regret, before following her. The bell chimed again as they left. The black SUVs started their engines and pulled away, disappearing into the Seattle rain. I stood there for a long time, shaking. Liam walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked down at the paper in my hand, the birth certificate. "No," I said. "But I will be." I picked up Leo, holding him tight against my chest. The secret was out. The hunt was over. Now, the siege has begun. And I knew that $500,000 was not going to be enough to save me this time. I needed more than money. I needed to destroy them before they destroyed me. The black SUVs did not return the next day. The Sterlings were too smart for that. They knew that a frontal assault on a single mother in a sympathetic neighborhood would look bad in the court of public opinion. Instead, they switched tactics. They stopped trying to break down my door with a battering ram and started trying to pick the lock with a diamond hairpin. It began with a courier. He arrived at Novara at 10 in the morning, a man in a crisp uniform who looked far too expensive to be delivering regular mail. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Sterling crest embossed on the wax seal. Inside was not a lawsuit, but a proposal. I sat at my desk, Leo cooing in his carrier beside me, and read the document. It was titled, Custodial Arrangement and Trust Agreement. The numbers were staggering. Victoria was offering me $5 million. $5 million. It was 10 times what she had paid to get rid of me. But as I read the fine print, the bile rose in my throat. The money came with strings thick enough to strangle a person, in exchange for the cash and a luxury residence in the Beacon Hill district of Boston. I was to relocate immediately. Leo would be enrolled in a prep school of the family's choosing. Leo would spend weekends and holidays at the Sterling estate. Leo would be raised as Julian's heir. I was not being paid to leave this time. I was being paid to become a glorified nanny with a 7-figure salary. I didn't tear the paper up. I didn't burn it. I simply folded it and put it in the safe, right next to Leo's birth certificate. It was evidence. It was proof that they knew Leo was theirs, and proof that they thought a mother's love had a price tag. $5 million, I whispered to Leo, tickling his chin. "Apparently, you are appreciating in value. Little lion." Then came the visits. Julian started showing up. He didn't come with bodyguards this time. He came alone, driving a rental car that was far too modest for him, wearing sweaters that made him look soft and approachable. He was playing the role of the repentant father, a role I suspected he had rehearsed in the mirror. He arrived at the studio on a Tuesday with a box wrapped in silver paper. "Celeste," he said, standing in the doorway, looking like a kicked puppy. "I brought something for the baby." I didn't look up from my laptop. "His name is Leo, Julian, and he doesn't need anything." "It's just a teddy bear," Julian said, stepping inside despite my lack of invitation. He placed the box on the corner of my desk. "It's stiff, mohair. It was mine when I was a baby." I stopped typing. I looked at the box, then at him. "You brought my son a used toy from a childhood you spent emotionally neglected by a mother who treats people like assets." Julian flinched. "I'm trying. Celeste, I want to know him. I missed his birth. I missed everything. You have to let me make it up to you. You can't make it up, I said, my voice flat. You were married to another woman when he was born. You are still married to her. Go home to your wife, Julian. Vanessa and I, it's complicated, he stammered. She's going through a hard time, the phantom pregnancy. She's mentally fragile. And I was pregnant and alone in a city where I knew no one, I countered. I didn't have the luxury of being fragile. Take your bear and leave. He left the bear. I donated it to a shelter on my way home. But while Julian was trying to win me over with nostalgia and soft eyes, the third point of this toxic triangle was not sitting idly by. Vanessa Croft might have been a fraud, but she was not stupid. She knew exactly what it meant if Julian reconnected with me. It meant she was out. She had no heir. She had no leverage. And her husband was spending his days in Seattle pining over his ex-wife. Her position as the future matriarch of the Sterling Empire was dangling by a thread, and she decided to bring out the scissors. It started subtly. Negative reviews began flooding Novara's online page. 1-star ratings from accounts created 20 minutes prior, claiming I had ruined their homes, that I was rude, that I had stolen designs. Then it escalated. I arrived at the studio on a Thursday morning to find Liam standing outside, his arms crossed, his face dark with anger. "Don't go inside, Rose," he said. "Why?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "What happened?" He stepped aside. The front window of Novara, the beautiful, floor-to-ceiling glass pane that let in the northern light I loved so much, was shattered. A brick lay in the middle of the showroom floor. And splashed across the remaining shards of glass and the brick facade was red paint. It wasn't just a splash. It was aggressive. It looked like blood. And scrawled in jagged red letters on the door was one word: thief. I stood there, clutching the strap of my diaper bag, staring at the violence. My first thought wasn't for the window. It wasn't for the ruined velvet sofa inside. It was for Leo. "I called the police," Liam said, his voice tight. "They filed a report, but they said without cameras. It's hard to prove who did it. Probably just kids." "It wasn't kids," I said, my voice shaking with a cold rage. "Kids tag with spray paint. This is personal." I knew who did it. I could practically smell Vanessa's expensive perfume in the air. Thief. She thought I was stealing her life, her husband, her future. I didn't call the police again. I called Victoria. I sat in my car, Leo asleep in the back seat, and dialed the number I had sworn never to call. She answered on the second ring. "Celeste," she said. She didn't sound surprised. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Have you reconsidered the settlement?" "Your daughter-in-law just had my business vandalized," I said. Cutting straight to the chase. "Someone threw a brick through my window and covered my studio in red paint. My son plays on that floor. Victoria." There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy pause. "That is a serious accusation," Victoria said finally, her voice smooth and unbothered. "Don't pretend," I snapped. "You know she's spiraling. You know she's terrified you're going to replace her with the mother of your actual grandson. Control her. Victoria, before I go to the press and tell them the power couple is resorting to mob tactics." "Vanessa is grieving," Victoria said. "She is in a delicate state. Sometimes grief manifests in anger. It is not her fault." I felt a chill go down my spine. There it was. The admission. She didn't deny it. She justified it. "So you are condoning this?" I asked, my thumb hovering over the record button on my phone. I had installed an app specifically for this moment. "You are saying it's okay for her to threaten the safety of your grandson because she's sad she faked a pregnancy." "I am saying," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "that you need to look at the bigger picture. Vanessa's father is a senator. We are in the middle of a very sensitive merger. A scandal involving her would be catastrophic for the stock price. You need to endure this. Celeste, be the bigger person. If you sign the agreement and move to Boston, you will be safe behind our gates. No one can touch you there." "You want me to endure violence so you can protect your stock price?" I asked. ensuring my voice was clear for the recording. "I want you to be reasonable," Victoria replied. "Whatever damage was done, send me the bill. I will pay double. Just keep the police out of it. We handle our problems internally." "Internally," I repeated, "like you handled Julian's affair, like you handled my divorce. Celeste, do not test my patience. Take the money, fix the window, and sign the custody agreement. It is the only way this stops." I hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the roof of the car. I looked at the recording file on my phone. Saved 10:42 a.m. She had just handed me a loaded gun. She had admitted to knowing about the attack, admitted to covering it up, and admitted to prioritizing her business over Leo's safety. I walked back to where Liam was sweeping up the glass. "Leave it," I said. "Rose, we have to clean this up," he said. "We will," I said. "But first, I need you to make a call. You said you knew a lawyer, a shark." Liam stopped sweeping. He looked at me, saw the fire in my eyes, and nodded. "Robert Thorne. He eats billionaires for breakfast." "Call him," I said. "Tell him I want to hire him. Tell him I have a recording." Robert Thorne was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He had an office in downtown Seattle that smelled of old books and expensive scotch. He listened to my story, listened to the recording, and looked at the NDA and the $5 million offer. When he looked up, he was smiling. It was a terrifying smile. "They are sloppy," Thorne said. "They are used to people folding the moment they flash a checkbook. They have no idea how to handle someone who doesn't care about money." "I don't want their money," I said. "I want them to leave us alone." "Then we have to make the cost of bothering you higher than the cost of leaving you alone," Thorne said. We drafted a letter. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a warning shot. In the letter, we declined the $5 million offer. We declined the luxury residence. And then, we attached a transcript of the call with Victoria. We added a simple paragraph: "Any further contact, harassment, or vandalism directed at Ms. Harrington or her business will result in the immediate release of this recording, as well as the full details of the coercion surrounding the original non-disclosure agreement and the fraudulent nature of Mr. Sterling's current marriage. To the New York Times, the Washington Post, and every major news outlet in the country, this is your only warning. We sent it via courier." The reaction was immediate silence. Julian stopped visiting. The negative reviews stopped. The black SUVs stayed in Boston for a week. I thought I had won. I thought I had scared them off. I repaired the window at Novara. I went back to work. I started to breathe again. But I had underestimated Victoria Sterling. I had backed her into a corner. Yes, but a cornered animal doesn't just cower. It looks for a new angle of attack. They couldn't harass me. They couldn't buy me. They couldn't use violence. So, they decided to use the one weapon I couldn't defend against with a recording: the law. 10 days after I sent the letter, I received a summons. It wasn't a custody agreement. It was a filing for emergency custody. I sat in Thorne's office, reading the document, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't arguing that I had broken the contract. They were arguing that I was unfit. The document painted a picture of a woman who was mentally unstable, citing my stress during the marriage. It claimed I was financially precarious, citing my failing business, referencing the vandalism as proof I ran an unsafe environment. It claimed I was exposing the child to danger. And worst of all, they used my own alias against me. The mother, Celeste Harrington, is currently living under a false identity. Rose, engaging in deceptive practices that raise serious questions about her moral character and stability. A child cannot be raised in a web of lies. "They are going to try to strip you clean," Thorne said, his face grim. "They are going to drag every mistake you've ever made into the light. They are arguing that you are poor, reckless, and deceitful, while they are stable, wealthy, and morally upright." "Morally upright," I scoffed. "They covered up a fake pregnancy." "Which they will deny," Thorne said. And unless we can prove it, it's hearsay. But your alias? That's a fact. Your lower income bracket? That's a fact. The broken window? That's a fact. I looked out the window at the gray Seattle skyline. They had taken the carrot away. They had put down the stick. And now, they had picked up the gavel. Let them come, I said, though my stomach was churning with fear. I have the truth on my side. In family court, Thorne said gently, truth is often less important than perception. We need to be perfect. Celeste, from this moment on, you need to be the Virgin Mary of Seattle. Because they are going to try to paint you as the whore of Babylon. I went home that night and looked at Leo sleeping in his crib. He looked so peaceful, completely unaware that his grandmother was currently paying a team of lawyers $500 an hour to prove that his mother was trash. I realized then that the silence of the last week wasn't a retreat. It was a deep breath before the plunge. They were coming for my son, not with thugs or checks, but with suits and subpoenas, and I had to be ready. The war had officially moved from the shadows into the spotlight, and the Sterlings were not holding back. I was at the grocery store, buying formula and diapers, when my card was declined. Insufficient funds, the cashier said, loud enough for the line behind me to hear. That's impossible, I said, my face heating up. Try it again, she did. Declined. I checked my banking app. The screen flashed red. Account frozen. Pending legal action. I stood there, staring at the phone, while Leo started to fuss in the cart. They had done it. They had leveraged some obscure clause in the NDA about breach of contract damages to get a judge to freeze my assets. They were trying to starve me out. They wanted me destitute so that when we walked into court, I would look like a woman who couldn't afford to feed her child, making their argument of unfitness a self-fulfilling prophecy. I left the groceries on the conveyor belt and walked out, humiliated but burning with a cold. Focused anger. But that was just the opening salvo. When I got home, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Liam had sent me a link. It was an exclusive interview in a national tabloid. The headline screamed, "Heartbroken heiress, how my husband's ex is destroying our miracle." Vanessa Croft was playing the victim card, and she was playing it with the skill of a seasoned actress. In the article, she claimed that I had been obsessively stalking Julian since the divorce. She claimed I had seduced him just before leaving to trap him with a baby. She painted a picture of herself as the long-suffering wife trying to build a family, while I was the deranged ex trying to wreck it out of jealousy. "She's crying in the photos," Liam texted. Actually crying, with a tissue and everything. The comments section was a cesspool. People who didn't know me, people who had never met me, were calling me a gold digger, a homewrecker, a thief. "Take the baby away from her," one comment said. "She's clearly using him for a paycheck." I sat in my dark living room, feeding Leo his last bottle of milk, and I felt something shift inside me. For months, I had been playing defense. I had been hiding. I had been running. I had been trying to be Rose to escape Celeste. But Rose couldn't fight this. Rose was a ghost. Celeste Harrington needed to come back. And she needed to bring a flamethrower. "Thorne," I said when I called my lawyer, "I'm done hiding." "Good," Thorne said. "What's the plan?" "Set up a live stream," I said. "Right here in the studio, in front of the broken window, in front of the mess." "Are you sure?" Thorne asked. "Once you do this, there is no going back. You are declaring war on a billion-dollar empire." "They froze my bank account. Robert, they are trying to take my son. I don't care about their empire. I care about my survival." The next morning, at 10 o'clock, we went live. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't dress up. I wore a simple white shirt and jeans. I sat on a stool in the middle of Novara, with the shattered glass of the window still visible in the background, a visual reminder of the violence I had endured. I looked directly into the camera lens. "My name is Celeste Harrington," I began. "And for the last 7 months, I have been known as Rose. I changed my name not because I was a criminal, but because I was paid $500,000 to disappear." I held up the contract, the real one. the one with Victoria Sterling's signature on it. "This is a non-disclosure agreement," I said, flipping the pages for the camera to see. "It was presented to me by my mother-in-law, Victoria Sterling, and my ex-husband, Julian Sterling. It states that in exchange for $500,000, I must leave the city of Boston within 48 hours. I must change my phone number. I must never claim to be Julian's wife again." I paused, letting the words sink in. "They told me I was barren," I continued. "They told me I was useless to their dynasty because I hadn't produced an heir in 3 years. They cast me aside to make room for a woman they believed was pregnant with a son." I picked up my medical records. This is a dated ultrasound report from a hospital here in Seattle. It confirms that I was already 7 weeks pregnant when I signed those divorce papers. I didn't know, and they certainly didn't know. They sent their own grandchild into exile because they were too impatient to wait for a blood test. I looked at the camera, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "I am not a gold digger. I am a mother who was thrown away like garbage. I am not a homewrecker. I am a woman who built a new life from scratch, only to have my business vandalized and my bank accounts frozen the moment they realized I had something they wanted." I leaned forward. "Vanessa Croft says I am destroying her family. I have never spoken to Vanessa Croft. I have never asked Julian for a dime since the divorce. I simply want to raise my son, Leo, in peace. But the Sterling family does not understand peace. They only understand possession. They want my son, not because they love him, but because he is an asset. He is a line on a ledger." "I am speaking today because I am terrified," I admitted, my voice breaking just a little. "I am a single mother fighting a billion-dollar corporation. They have frozen my money so I can't buy food. They have smeared my name so I can't get work, but I will not let them take my son. I will fight them with every breath I have, and I am asking you, the public, to witness this, because if I disappear again, you will know exactly who did it." I ended the stream. For a minute, there was silence in the studio. Liam looked at me, wide-eyed. Thorne nodded slowly. "That," Thorne said, "was nuclear." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The internet, which had been vilifying me an hour ago, did a collective 180-degree turn. The image of the contract with the brutal clause about leaving the city within 48 hours went viral. People were horrified. The narrative of the evil ex crumbled, replaced by the story of the David versus Goliath battle. Stand with Celeste began trending on Twitter. By noon, the stock price of Sterling Shipping Logistics took a nosedive. Investors don't like cruelty, or at least, they don't like cruelty that gets caught on camera. The hashtag Boycott Sterling started gaining traction, but the real blow came from the political sphere. Senator Croft, Vanessa's father, was a man who survived on public image. He saw the tide turning. He saw the comments calling the Sterlings monsters and child stealers. He realized that being associated with this mess was political suicide. At 2:00, his office released a brief statement. "Senator Croft is deeply vitalized by family values and is concerned by the recent allegations surrounding the Sterling family. He believes that the welfare of the child must come first and is distancing himself from any personal disputes involving his daughter's in-laws." It was a polite way of saying I'm out. The alliance was broken. The political shield that Victoria had relied on to protect Vanessa and, by extension, the company was gone, inside the Sterling mansion. The atmosphere must have been apocalyptic. I learned later that Julian had been watching the live stream in his office. He had watched me hold up the contract. He had watched me talk about being thrown away. And for the first time in his spineless life, the reality of what he had done hit him without the filter of his mother's manipulation. He stormed into the library where Victoria was frantically on the phone with PR crisis managers. "You froze her accounts," Julian shouted. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice to his mother. "You cut off the money she uses to feed my son." Victoria covered the receiver. "I did what was necessary to bring her to the table. She is stubborn. Julian, pressure creates diamonds." "She is not a diamond," Julian roared, smashing his hand onto the desk. She is the mother of your grandson, and you are starving them. Calm down, Victoria hissed. We are losing control of the narrative. We need to focus. I don't care about the narrative, Julian yelled. I care that my son is in Seattle with a mother who can't buy milk because of you. You told me it was about custody. You didn't tell me you were going to destroy her. He grabbed the phone from her hand and slammed it down into the cradle. Unfreeze the accounts, he ordered. Now! Victoria stared at him. She looked at the man who had been a boy yesterday. You are making a mistake. Showing weakness now will cost us everything. No, Mother, Julian said, his voice shaking. Listening to you has already cost me my wife and my son. I am not letting it cost me my soul. He pulled out his own phone and dialed the bank himself. In Seattle, I was sitting with Thorne, watching the news coverage, when my banking app pinged, account unlocked, balance available. I looked at Thorne. They blinked. No, Thorne said, looking at the screen where a reporter was discussing the senator's statement. They didn't blink. They flinched. You hit them where it hurts. Celeste, you hit their wallet and their pride. But the victory felt fragile. I knew Victoria. She wouldn't take this lying down. Julian might have had a moment of conscience, but Victoria was the one with the power, and a wounded predator is always the most dangerous. What now? I asked. Now, Thorne said. We wait for their counteroffer, because after today, unfit mother is a hard sell to a judge who just saw you dismantle $1 billion company with a piece of paper and a smartphone. I went to the window, the one that was still boarded up with plywood where the glass used to be. I touched the rough wood. I wasn't Rose anymore. I was Celeste. And for the first time in a long time, I liked the sound of my own name. The collapse of the Sterling Empire did not happen with a bang, but with the screech of tires on wet pavement and the shattering of glass. It was the sound of desperation colliding with reality. 3 days after the live stream that turned the tide of public opinion, the air in Seattle felt heavy. Charged with an electricity I could not name, I was at home, not the studio. It was late, past 10 in the evening, and the rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the streetlights into streaks of yellow and orange. Leo was asleep in his crib, finally settled after a day of teething. I was sitting by the front window of my ground-floor apartment, watching the storm, feeling a strange knot of anxiety in my stomach that no amount of tea could dissolve. I saw the headlights first. They were blindingly bright, cutting through the darkness with aggressive speed. A car was tearing down our quiet residential street, moving far too fast for the slick conditions. It was a massive white Range Rover, the kind of vehicle that screams entitlement, completely out of place among the sedans and hatchbacks of my neighbors. The driver was not swerving to avoid potholes. She was swerving because she was out of control. I stood up, my hand pressing against the cold glass. The car seemed to be aiming for something. It was aiming for my building. For a terrifying second, I locked eyes with the silhouette behind the wheel. Even through the rain and the distance, I knew it was Vanessa. She had driven across the country. She had left the ruins of her reputation in Boston and came here to finish what she started. I saw the front wheels jerk as she tried to correct a skid, but physics is a cruel mistress. The SUV hydroplaned. It spun, a graceful, horrifying pirouette of 2 tons of metal, and smashed violently into the concrete barrier protecting the electrical transformer just 20 feet from my front door. The sound was deafening. Metal crumpled like paper. The horn started blaring. A continuous, mournful wail that pierced the night. Smoke began to pour from the hood. I did not think so. I did not weigh the pros and cons. I did not remember the reviews she had faked or the window she had broken. I simply reacted. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and ran out the door into the pouring rain. "There's been a crash," I shouted into the phone as I sprinted across the wet grass. "My address. Send an ambulance. The car is smoking." I reached the wreck. The driver's side door was jammed against the concrete, but the window was shattered. Inside, Vanessa was slumped over the airbag, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. She was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, darting around the smoke-filled cabin. "You," she rasped when she saw me. "You took everything." She tried to move, maybe to hurt me, maybe to escape, but she cried out in pain. Her leg was pinned. "Don't move," I ordered, my voice cutting through the rain. The smell of gasoline was thick in the air. "The engine is smoking. Vanessa, we need to get you out." I ran to the passenger side. It was unlocked. I wrenched the door open and climbed into the cabin. It smelled of expensive leather, blood, and the stale odor of vodka. She was drunk. Of course she was drunk. "Get away from me," she screamed, flailing her arms, her nails scratching at my face. I hate you. Stop it." I grabbed her wrists, pinning them down. "The car could catch fire. I am pulling you out." I unbuckled her seatbelt. I wrapped my arms around her waist and pulled. She was dead weight, sobbing now, her rage dissolving into the terrified weeping of a child who realizes she has broken something she cannot fix. I dragged her across the center console, out of the passenger door, and onto the wet grass, pulling her far away from the smoking wreckage. I sat there in the mud, holding the woman who had tried to destroy my life, putting pressure on the wound on her head with the sleeve of my sweater while we waited for the sirens. "Why?" she whispered, looking up at me with confused, tear-filled eyes. "Why did you help me?" I looked down at her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel hate. I just felt exhausted. "Because I am a mother," I said softly, "and I don't want your mother to bury you." The police and paramedics arrived minutes later. They took Vanessa away on a stretcher. They took my statement. And then, the street was quiet again, save for the tow truck dragging the carcass of the Range Rover away. I went inside, washed the blood off my hands, and checked on Leo. He was still sleeping. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. It was the final nail in the coffin of the Sterling reputation. My apartment building, like many in the area, had a security camera pointed at the parking lot. A neighbor across the street had a doorbell camera. By morning, the footage was everywhere. The world watched as the victim, Vanessa Croft, drove drunk across state lines to attack a single mother. They watched her crash, and then they watched the villain Celeste run barefoot into the rain, climb into a smoking vehicle, and drag her attacker to safety. The narrative didn't just shift. It shattered. I was no longer just the underdog. I was the saint. I was the woman who turned the other cheek and saved a life. And the Sterlings, they were the monsters who had driven a young woman to madness and tormented a hero. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. At 9 a.m, the board of directors of Sterling Shipping convened an emergency meeting. The stock had plummeted 30% in opening trading. Advertisers were pulling out. The brand was toxic. They didn't ask Victoria to step down. They fired her. I heard the news from Liam, who burst into the studio later that day, waving his phone. "She's out," he shouted. They voted unanimously. Victoria Sterling has been removed as chairwoman for gross negligence and reputational damage. She is done. Rose, she is gone. But the dominoes kept falling. The investigation into Vanessa's accident revealed the alcohol in her system, but it also opened a Pandora's box regarding her family. Journalists, sensing blood in the water, started digging into how a senator's daughter could fake a pregnancy and harass a woman without consequence. They found payments, they found cover-ups, and then they found the corruption. Senator Croft, the man who had distanced himself from the scandal only days prior, was implicated in a bribery scheme involving zoning laws, the very laws he had used to protect Sterling interests in the past. The butterfly effect of one woman's jealousy had triggered a federal investigation into her father. By noon, the senator had resigned in disgrace, and then Julian came. He didn't come to the studio. He came to the hospital where I had gone to get a tetanus shot for a scratch I received pulling Vanessa out. He found me in the waiting room. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped, He looked at me, sitting there in my plain clothes, and then he looked at the TV screen on the wall, which was replaying the footage of me saving his wife. He walked over and knelt in front of me, right there on the hospital linoleum. "I saw it," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "I saw what you did." "I did what anyone would do," I said, refusing to look at him. "No," Julian said, tears spilling over. "No one else would have done that. Not after what she did to you. Not after what we did to you." He reached out to take my hand, but stopped himself. He didn't deserve to touch me. He knew that now. "I am so sorry. Celeste," he sobbed, ignoring the people staring in the waiting room. "I was a coward. I let my mother run my life. I let her hurt you. I let her turn me into this. It's too little, Julian," I said gently, "and it's too late." "I know," he said. He stood up, wiping his face. "But I can do one thing right. Just one thing." He walked out of the hospital doors and straight into the crowd of reporters who were camped outside, waiting for a quote from the hero ex-wife. I watched through the glass as Julian Sterling stood before the microphones. He didn't read from a prepared statement. He spoke from the ruin of his life. "My name is Julian Sterling," he said, his voice projecting clearly for the first time in his life. "And I am here to tell you the truth. Celeste Harrington is innocent. She never deceived me. She never stole anything. I was the one who was unfaithful. I was the one who abandoned her, and my family. We tried to destroy her because we were afraid of her strength. We were wrong. She is the best person I have ever known, and I am not worthy of being in the same room as her, let alone raising her son." He looked directly into the camera. "I am withdrawing the petition for custody. I am withdrawing all legal action. Leo belongs with his mother. He always has." That evening, my lawyer, Robert Thorne, called me. He sounded almost bored, which was his way of expressing extreme delight. "The judge just threw the case out," Thorne said. Dismissed with prejudice, he cited the moral turpitude of the plaintiffs. He said that after viewing the evidence of harassment and the public admission of guilt by the father, granting custody to the Sterling family would be, and I quote, "an act of negligence by the court. You won. Celeste, it's over." I hung up the phone. I sat on my living room floor, pulling Leo into my lap. He was playing with a wooden block, completely unaware that his future had just been secured. "We won," I whispered into his soft hair. "We actually won." But the cost of the war was visible in the debris left behind. Victoria Sterling did not take her firing well. The loss of her company, the public humiliation of her son's confession, and the destruction of her carefully curated legacy was too much for her system to handle. That night, she suffered a mild stroke in the library of the empty mansion. She was found by a maid the next morning, slumped over the desk where she had once forced me to sign my life away. She survived, but the doctors said her speech would be impaired. The woman who had used words as weapons was now unable to form a coherent sentence. She would spend the rest of her life trapped in her own body, a prisoner of the silence she had tried to impose on me. Vanessa was in rehab, facing charges for drunk driving and reckless endangerment. Her political protection was gone. Her marriage was over. She was alone, and I was still here. The requests for interviews came in by the thousands. Good Morning America wanted me. Vogue wanted me. They wanted the Saint of Seattle. They wanted the woman who forgave the unforgivable. I declined them all. I didn't want to be a celebrity. I didn't want to be a saint. I just wanted to be an interior designer and a mother. I went back to work 2 days later. There were reporters outside Novara. I walked past them, head held high, refusing to answer questions about the Sterlings. "Ms. Harrington," one shouted, "do you have a message for Victoria Sterling?" I stopped at the door. I turned. "No," I said simply. "I have nothing to say to her. My life speaks for itself." I walked inside and locked the door. The studio was quiet. The sun was streaming through the repaired window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I picked up my pencil. I looked at the sketch of the loft I was designing. The empire had fallen. The kings and queens were dethroned, but in my small kingdom of velvet and brick, the walls were still standing, and for the first time, I wasn't building a fortress to keep people out. I was building a home. The silence that follows a hurricane is often more deafening than the wind itself. For 30 days, my life had been a cacophony of sirens, camera shutters, legal threats, and public outrage. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The satellite trucks left the curb outside Novara. The hashtags stopped trending. The world moved on to the next scandal, leaving me standing in the quiet wreckage of what used to be a war zone. It was a Tuesday in December when I received the message. It didn't come from a lawyer or a PR firm. It was a handwritten note, delivered to the studio by a courier who looked bored rather than intimidated. Green Lake Park. The bench by the boat rental. Noon. Alone. There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting. It was shaky now, the sharp, angular loops of the G and L trembling slightly. But it was unmistakably hers. I debated not going. I had won. The court case was dismissed. I had full custody. I owed the Sterling family nothing, not a minute of my time, not a glance in their direction. But curiosity is a heavy anchor, and perhaps, deep down, I needed closure. I needed to see the monster without her fangs. I took Leo with me, not as a shield, but as a statement. He was 6 weeks old now, alert and strong, bundled into a thick woolen snowsuit that made him look like a tiny, blue marshmallow. The park was gray and misty, the lake a flat sheet of steel under the low clouds. I saw her from a distance. She was sitting on a wooden bench, staring out at the water. She was alone. No bodyguards, no assistant holding an umbrella, no driver waiting in an idling car. Victoria Sterling looked small. The woman who had once filled a room with her sheer presence seemed to have shrunk inside her cashmere coat. Her posture, usually rigid as a steel beam, was slumped. A cane rested against her knee. I walked up to the bench. The gravel crunched under my boots. She turned her head slowly. The left side of her face drooped slightly, a lingering souvenir from the stroke that had struck her down the night her empire fell. Her eyes, however, were still sharp, though the fire in them had dimmed to a smolder. "You came," she said. Her speech was slow, the words slightly slurred, requiring visible effort to form. "I did," I replied, remaining standing. I adjusted Leo in the carrier on my chest. "You have 5 minutes. Victoria?" She looked at Leo. Her gaze was hungry, desperate, devoid of the calculation that used to define her every interaction. She didn't look at him like an heir. She looked at him like a lifeline she had severed with her own hands. "He looks like Julian," she whispered. "He looks like himself." I corrected gently but firmly. Victoria reached into her coat pocket. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a thick legal briefing this time. It was a single sheet of paper. "My will," she said, extending it toward me. I didn't take it. "I don't want your money, Victoria. I thought we established that." "Read it," she insisted, her voice rasping. "Please." I took the paper. It was a draft, notarized and signed. I, Victoria Sterling, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath 50% of my personal estate, including the trust holdings in the Cayman Islands and the property in Martha's Vineyard, to my grandson, Leo Harrington. I stopped reading. My eyes scanned for the catch. I looked for the clause that demanded a name change, or boarding school, or weekends in Boston. There was nothing. Just a clean, unconditional transfer of wealth that amounted to tens of millions of dollars. "No conditions," Victoria said, watching my face. "He keeps your name. He stays with you. I want him to have it." I looked at the paper, then at the old woman sitting on the damp bench, a month ago. She had tried to destroy me to save $5 million. Now, she was giving away half her fortune for nothing in return. "Why?" I asked. Because, she said, looking back at the lake. I realized something in the hospital. I have all the money in the world. Celeste, and no one came to visit me. She turned back to me, her eyes wet. Vanessa is in prison. My board members are scrambling to save their own skins. My friends, they were never friends. I am alone. I have an empire, and I have no one to leave it to. He is my blood. He is the only good thing left. I folded the paper slowly. I felt the weight of it, the power it represented. 50% of the sterling personal fortune could build hospitals, fund schools, ensure Leo never had to work a day in his life. But then I looked down at my son. He was sleeping, his cheek pressed against my chest. He was warm. He was safe. I can't take this, I said. Victoria's face fell. It is not for you. It is for him. I know, I said. But money from you always comes with a cost. Victoria, even if it's not written on the paper, if he grows up knowing he has $50 million waiting for him, he becomes a target. He becomes sterling, and I want him to be free. I placed the paper on the bench beside her. Keep your money, I said softly. Donate it. Burn it. I don't care. Money is what you use to control Julian. It's what you used to try and buy me. It's poison to this family. I can earn enough to feed him. I can earn enough to send him to college. But the one thing he needs, you can't write a check for— What is that? She asked, her voice breaking. Love, I said. Unconditional, unbought love. You don't know how to give that. Victoria. And until you learn, you have nothing to offer him. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine shame in her eyes. She slumped back against the bench, defeated not by a lawyer, but by the truth. I tried, she whispered. In my own way, I tried. Your way was wrong, I said. I turned to leave, but the sound of footsteps on the gravel stopped me. Julian was walking toward us. He looked different. The Julian I had married wore Italian suits and a perpetual expression of anxiety. This Julian was wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a thick canvas jacket. He had lost weight. His face was gaunt, covered in a shadow of a beard. But his eyes were clear. The frantic, haunted look was gone, replaced by a somber resignation. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at me. I told him not to come, Victoria muttered, wiping her eyes. But he is stubborn now. Hello, Celeste, Julian said. His voice was steady. Julian, I acknowledged him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. I brought you this. It's the finalized divorce decree from Vanessa. The annulment. Actually, since the marriage was based on fraud, it was easier to dissolve than I expected. He handed it to me. I took it. It was just paper, but it felt like the final chain falling off my wrist. And, he continued, taking a deep breath, I wanted to tell you that I'm leaving. Leaving, I asked. Back to Boston. No, he shook his head. I resigned from the company this morning. I sold my shares. I'm going to Kenya. I blinked. Kenya. There's a nonprofit there that builds water filtration systems for rural villages, he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. I used to study engineering before Mother made me switch to business. I always wanted to build things. I'm going to go build things. With my hands, where no one knows my last name. It was a cliché. Perhaps the rich boy running away to find himself in charity work. But looking at him, I believed it. He needed to run. He needed to sweat Sterling out of his system. That sounds good for you, I said sincerely. I need to be someone else, he admitted. I don't like the man I was here. I hurt you. Celeste, I hurt you so much because I was too weak to stand up to her. He gestured vaguely at his mother. I need to go somewhere where I can't hide behind money. He stepped closer, his eyes dropping to the carrier on my chest. Can I— He hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides. Can I just hold him once before I go? I looked at him. I saw the regret etched into every line of his face. I saw the father who had missed the pregnancy, the birth, the first smile. I saw a man who had lost everything because he realized too late what mattered. I could have said no. I could have been cruel. I could have told him that he lost that right the day he let me walk out into the snow. But hate is heavy. It is a burden that drags you down, and I wanted to fly. "Just for a minute," I said. I unbuckled the carrier. I lifted Leo out, careful to keep him wrapped in his blanket. Julian held out his arms, stiff and awkward. I placed the baby in his arms. Julian exhaled. A sound that was half sob, half prayer. He looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyelashes resting against rosy cheeks. He rocked him slightly, instinctively. "Leo," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Leo stirred. He opened his eyes, those dark, inquisitive eyes, and looked up at the stranger holding him. He didn't cry. He reached out a small, gloved hand and grasped Julian's thumb. Julian broke. He didn't make a sound, but his shoulders shook. Tears ran down his face, dripping onto his canvas jacket. He stood there, holding his son, weeping for the life he had thrown away. Victoria watched from the bench, turning her head away to hide her own grief. After a minute, I stepped forward. "Time's up, Julian." He nodded, sniffing, and reluctantly handed Leo back to me. I strapped him back in, feeling the warmth of him against my heart. "Celeste," Julian said, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I know I can't ask for forgiveness, but if I change, if I really change, can I see him again in a year and 2? I looked at the two of them, the fallen queen and the exiled prince. They were strangers to me now. My family was Liam and Martha and the team at Novara. My family was the people who stood by me when I had nothing. But Leo was their blood, and denying that wouldn't make it untrue. "I won't stop you from knowing him," I said, my voice clear in the damp air. "But I will not have him pulled into your chaos. Here are the terms." I stood straighter, feeling the steel in my own spine. "You can visit, once a month, here in Seattle, nowhere else. You do not take him to Boston. You do not take him to the estate. Visits are supervised by me. Always. If you are late, you lose the visit. If you try to manipulate him, you lose the visit. If you ever try to use him for publicity or leverage, you never see him again." I looked at Julian. "And you? Go to Kenya. Do your work. If you come back as a better man, we can talk about introducing you as his father. Until then, you are just a visitor." Julian nodded vigorously. I accept everything. "And you?" I turned to Victoria. "You keep your money. If you want to see him, you come here. You sit on a park bench like a normal grandmother. You bring a toy, not a trust fund. If you can do that, you can get to know him. If not, then this is goodbye." Victoria looked at me. For a moment, I thought the old arrogance would flare up. I thought she would scoff at the idea of being commanded by her former daughter-in-law, but she just nodded, a slow, humble movement. "I understand." "Good," I said. I turned around. I didn't say goodbye. There was no need. I walked away from the bench, back up the gravel path toward the city. The rain began to fall again, a light, cleansing mist. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see if they were watching me. I walked toward my car, where my life was waiting. I had a meeting with a client at 2. I had to pick up formula. I had a design to finish. I was a single mother. I was a business owner. I was free. The hate that had fueled me for so long began to dissipate, evaporating like the fog off the lake. I didn't forgive them. Some things are not meant to be forgiven, but I had released them. They were no longer the villains in my story. They were just footnotes. I touched Leo's head. "It's just us. Little lion," I whispered. "Just us." And for the first time, that didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a victory. 2 years is enough time for a scar to fade into a white line, a mark that no longer hurts when you touch it, but serves as a reminder that you survived. Seattle in July was nothing like the weeping, gray city I had arrived in. It was vibrant, exploding with color and light. The sun hung high over the Puget Sound, turning the water into a sheet of hammered diamonds. I stood on the porch of my new house, a craftsman bungalow in the Queen Anne neighborhood, watching my son chase a golden retriever puppy across the lawn. Novara was no longer just a studio in a converted warehouse. It was a brand. We were featured in Architectural Digest last month, not because of a scandal, not because of a viral video, but because the work was undeniable. We had just finished redesigning the lobby of the city's newest boutique hotel, and my schedule was booked out for 18 months. I had 12 employees now, a team of talented artists and designers who looked to me for leadership. They didn't know me as the ex-wife of a billionaire. They knew me as Celeste, the woman who could look at an empty room and see a home. "He's going to catch that tail eventually," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see Liam leaning against the doorframe, holding 2 mugs of iced tea. His hair was still messy, and there was a smudge of drywall dust on his cheek from the renovation work he was helping me with in the guest room. Liam had become essential. We weren't married. We weren't rushing. After escaping a cage, you don't sprint into another one, even if the door is open. But he was there. He was the one who taught Leo how to stack blocks. He was the one who sat with me on the nights when the old fears crept back in. He was a partner in every sense of the word, patient and steady as the foundation of a house. If he catches it, he won't know what to do with it, I laughed, taking the tea. "Thank you." "Mail came," Liam said, handing me a small stack of envelopes along with the tea. "There is a postcard with a stamp I don't recognize." I looked down. The stamp featured a lion on the savannah. It was postmarked from Nairobi, Kenya. I sat down on the porch swing, and Liam sat beside me, giving me space but staying close enough that I could feel his warmth. I flipped the postcard over. The handwriting was rough, scrawled in haste, but legible. "Celeste, we finished the 3rd well today in the Northern District. The water is clean. The kids were dancing in the spray. I have never been this tired, and I have never slept this well. I'm living in a shipping container that is smaller than my old closet, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I have enough. Hope you and the little lion are well. I'll be in Seattle in November for the visit. Jay." I looked at the picture on the front. It wasn't a scenic landscape. It was a candid shot of a group of workers standing in red dust, laughing, and there, in the middle, looking sunburnt, thinner, and covered in mud, was Julian. He was smiling. It wasn't the polite, tight-lipped smile he used to wear at galas. It was a real smile, wide and unguarded. "He looks happy," Liam noted, looking over my shoulder. "He looks human," I said. Finally, I placed the postcard on the table. I didn't feel a pang of longing, nor did I feel a spike of anger. I just felt a quiet sense of resolution. Julian had found his penance, and in it, he was finding himself. He was no longer the weak man who had let me go. He was a man trying to build something real. That was all I had ever wanted for him. "I need to check something," I said. Standing up, I walked into the house, through the sunlit living room with its velvet sofas and brass accents my signature style, and into my home office. In the corner stood a small, fireproof safe. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The heavy door swung open. Inside, sitting on top of Leo's birth certificate and passport, was a single piece of paper. It wasn't the original check that had been deposited long ago, but it was the bank record of that specific deposit. $500,000. For a long time, I had looked at this number and felt shame. I felt like it was the price tag on my dignity. I had used a portion of it to start Novara, telling myself it was blood money that I was laundering into something beautiful. But today, looking at it, I saw it differently. I had paid it back, not to the Sterlings, they didn't want it, but to Leo. Every cent of that original $500,000, plus interest, had been moved into a trust fund for him weeks ago. The money I lived on now, the money that bought this house, the money that bought the food in the fridge, was money I had earned. I had scrubbed the sterling stain off every dollar. I picked up the paper. It was just ink and wood pulp. It held no power over me. It was a receipt for a transaction that was no longer valid. I didn't tear it up in a dramatic fit of rage. I didn't burn it. I simply walked over to the shredder by my desk. I fed the paper into the machine. It whirred, a mundane, mechanical sound. The paper disappeared, turning into confetti in seconds. "Gone," I whispered. I felt lighter. The last physical tether to the woman who had sat in that library and signed her name in tears was severed. She was gone, and I didn't miss her. She had been naive. She had been frightened, but she had been brave enough to survive so that I could exist. I walked back out to the porch. "Everything okay?" Liam asked. "Better than okay," I said. "It's done." Just then, a delivery truck pulled up to the curb. The driver hopped out, carrying a box that looked like it had seen better days. It was taped up with an excessive amount of packaging tape. "Package for Leo Harrington," the driver called out. I signed for it and brought it to the porch. There was no return address label, but there was a note taped to the top. For the boy. He likes to build things. I assume. It was from Victoria. I opened the box. I expected, perhaps out of habit, to see something exorbitant, a silver rattle, a cashmere blanket, an antique rocking horse. Instead, the box was filled to the brim with colorful plastic building blocks, the kind you buy at a regular department store. There were wooden puzzles with chunky pieces. There was a set of finger paints, and right on top was a plastic hard hat that cost maybe $5. I picked up the hard hat. It was bright yellow and completely tacky. I laughed. I laughed until my sides ached. "What is it?" Liam asked, grinning at my reaction. "It's from Victoria," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. "She sent cheap plastic toys." "The ex-chairwoman of Sterling Shipping sent plastic toys?" Liam asked, incredulous. "She's learning," I said, looking at the box with a strange warmth. "She realized she can't buy him, so she's trying to just play with him." It was a small gesture, almost clumsy, but it meant more than the $5 million offer she had once made. It meant she was finally accepting the terms I had set in the park. She was accepting her role as a grandmother, not a matriarch. She was learning that value isn't printed on a price tag. "Leo," I called out. "Come see what Grandma sent." Leo stopped his pursuit of the puppy and ran toward the porch, his little legs pumping. He was 2.5 years old now. A whirlwind of energy and curiosity. He scrambled up the steps and dove into the box with a squeal of delight. "Blocks," he shouted, grabbing a handful of colorful plastic. "Build Mama. Build—" "Yes, baby," I said, sitting down on the floor beside him. "We can build anything you want." He jammed the hard hat onto his head. It was too big and slid down over his eyes. He giggled, pushing it back up. "Look, Liam hat." "I see, buddy," Liam said, sitting down with us. "You look like a boss." I sat back, watching them, the architect and the boy, building a tower out of red and blue bricks on the porch of a home that love built. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, in the flower beds. The sunflowers I had planted, dozens of them, were standing tall. Their heavy heads turned toward the fading light. I had planted them because sunflowers are resilient. They can grow in dirt that other flowers reject. They always find the sun. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the cold library, the snowy drive, the lonely apartment in the rain. I thought about the moment I saw the 2 pink lines and felt like my world was ending. I had been so afraid of losing everything. I didn't realize that sometimes. You have to lose the life you thought you wanted to find the life you deserve. I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a socialite. I was Celeste. I was a mother who had fought a dragon and won. Not with a sword, but with a truth. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from Leo's forehead. He paused in his building and looked at me. His eyes were dark and serious for a moment, so much like Julian's, but filled with a light that was all mine. "Mama happy?" he asked. It was a simple question, the kind only a child asks. I looked at the garden. I looked at the man who loved me without conditions. I looked at the sun who was the center of my universe. Yes, Leo, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. Mama is very happy. I picked him up, holding him close, smelling the scent of grass and sunshine in his hair. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the sunflowers standing like sentinels in the dusk. Women are taught to compromise. We are taught to shrink, to sign the paper, to take the check, to disappear quietly so we don't disturb the peace. But peace bought with silence is not peace. It is submission. My value did not come from the ring I had left on the table. It did not come from the settlement check I had shredded. It came from the moment I stood in the rain and decided that I would not be erased. It came from the moment I looked a powerful woman in the eye and told her that her money had no power here. I squeezed Leo gently, and he rested his head on my shoulder. Tired from his play, I was once paid to disappear. But in the end, I was the only one who truly existed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of resilience, justice, and the power of a mother's love. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city like Boston, a rainy refuge like Seattle, or somewhere entirely different? Please let me know in the comments below. I love reading your thoughts. If you enjoyed Celeste's journey, please subscribe to the Crimson Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay strong.